Okay, well, welcome, gentlemen, and we're going to be looking at a teaching from Rabbi Nosson about Korach's argument to Moshe. And one of his arguments to Moshe, we know, is that a tallis has on it a blue thread on each corner. We're going to dedicate the class in the merit of Yitzchak ben Abraham, his Neshama Shel ben Aliyah. So that we know that the tallis has on it some techeiles. Techeiles is this blue thread. And Korach's argument was if the entire garment itself was blue, it had an entire state of blue, does it even need tzitzit? Does it even need to have tzitzit on it? Interesting concept, okay? So let's see why that was an argument that he presented. Isa b'chazal, sheshal Korach tallis shekula techeiles chayeves b'tzitzis, hischil mesachik umatil tallis, bais malis forim chay mezuzah. Now he asked another question. A house that is filled with holy books, filled with sforim, does it need a mezuzah? Does it need a mezuzah?
What did Hashem say?
Baharas b'chirgris tamei pircha b'kulei tahar hana sharotza lahavin akol b'chochmasei. Now, understand the following. Torah commandment, but you understand his wisdom was quite logical. If you think about it, the whole purpose of a mezuzah is to remind you that Hashem is in the space. The whole purpose of techeiles is to define a space of direction. Techeiles, as they say, is the word techeiles, techeiles, the direction, to be able to focus on God. Now, his arguments are very logical, because if you take a tallis and it's now fully blue, which is fully embedded in its direction to Hashem, and a room which is fully dedicated to God through the sforim there, surely it doesn't need a mezuzah. Surely it doesn't need techeiles. Very logical argument. Now, Manuel, you arguing very well and say, listen, buddy, it's a Torah commandment. You can't sidestep a Torah commandment. But now this is what's so unique about the teaching here, and this is what Rabbi Nachman is bringing up. Korach stumbled with a fundamental mistake, and that is he wanted to understand everything according to his wisdom. And he thought that there's no other wisdom or understanding that supersedes his understanding.
That's called arrogance.
That's an ultimate arrogance. That's where we see real arrogance, when a person needs to have everything fit into their logic in order to be able to do it. If I don't fully understand something, or I'm not fully engaged with it, sorry, can't do it. And what Korach was doing here was he was saying, I don't get the logical spaces. This doesn't make sense to me fully. I haven't grasped it all. He couldn't appreciate that there was greater wisdom than himself. And with his own intellect, which God very much wants us to use. God is not saying, do a lobotomy and remove your entire intellect. It's saying you must use your intellect in life. At the same time, you must relinquish your intellect. Ultimate revelation of humility is where an individual is able to recognize there is something greater than me in wisdom. And I have to relinquish my need to fully understand, my need to fully grasp to that greater wisdom. And that's where he says, Valkein shol tallis shekula techeiles eich shaykh shtchai b'tzitzis ki aloi tallis shol min acher chut echad shel techeiles poitra hainu ma'acher shel techeiles gvoya v'kadish kol kach ad sheyesh koyach lechut echad shel techeiles esaken es tallis. Now he said like this, in his logic, again, one thread of blue techeiles on a tzitzis fixes up the whole thing, rectifies the whole space. So he thinks to himself, if the whole garment is blue, Why do I need the tzitzis? עד שיש כוח לחוט אחד של תכלס לכן הטלס של מין אחר לעשות זה כאילו היא כולה tzitzis or techeiles. The whole framework is, if you have techeiles on your tzitzis, is as if the whole thing is techeiles. It turns into techeiles entirely. ובאמס בוודאי כן הוא שעל ידי חוט הציציס נעשה כל הטלס כאילו כל הציציס, כי בוודאי נמשך קדושת הציציס שעיקר התכלס על כל הטלס ונעשה הטלס כאילו היא כל התכלס, כל הציציס. אוקיי, אנו מברכים ניסתה בציציס ואנו מברכים ניסתה בטלס שתלויים בו ציציס, כי התפסנו הוא רק בציציס.
What the techeiles is now.
It's a big argument, which we won't go into now, but many individuals believe that's the case. We do know. So, he writes, when you make a blessing on the tallis, do you say lihisatef b'tallis, or do you say lihisatef b'tzitzis? So he says we say b'tzitzis, but we don't say lihisatef b'tallis. We don't say that I'm surrounding myself with the garment of a tallis that has on it tzitzis. Why is that of relevance? It's because it's a fascinating concept, this. Because the tzitzis again represents, as we spoke about this morning in Shul, it represents the frazzled parts of self. Okay? Now, if you think about it, it should be lihisatef b'tallis, because we want to elevate ourselves into the tallis. The whole purpose of the tallis is take the frazzled parts of self, put them in a unified environment of one garment, and that's what we want to surround ourselves with. No. What we see here is that it's predominantly the frazzled parts of self that make oneself holy. Understand? It's the parts of life that create dissonance, that create confusion, that creates splintered parts of who we are. And when we deal with those elements and we draw them back in and we heal those spaces, that's what makes us holy. A person who sits up on the mountain not being disrupted by anything and is just in this, very, very tranquil space of meditation and connection with nothing bothering them. No kids running around the house, no spouse to have to deal with, no engagement with stresses at work. Is that holy? And what he's saying here is not holy. Holiness is made through the tzitzis. It's through the frazzled parts of self that are then connected to the unity and the oneness that a person is able to retain. What's it got to do with Korach? So he says, Kiluhu kulei tzitzis vakein, ta Korach v'shal machash techeiles gvoya v'kedusha kol kach ad sheyesh la koyach shechut echad shel techeiles yiftar setalis shel min acher v'yaseh setalis kiluhu techeiles im kein v'kol shekein v'kol kavachom shel talis atzmai yikula shel techeiles ein medin shetiftar es atzma ubevadai היא קושיה גדולה, לפי תולסי, שמה כשכם שמגיעים למדרגס עליונות, שוב אין שייך יצר הרע, ואין שייך חילוק בין גבוה לגבוה, מעל גבוה. So now, on a deeper spiritual level, what he was saying is like this. Let's see if we can understand it. We'll have to try. Saying, if I turn my garment into techeiles, my entire garment into techeiles, which is saying, if I can tap into a part of myself which is so tranquil and is so conscious and is so focused on what life is about, which is just the oneness that exists throughout all, if I can get to that level, don't I even lose my requirement to engage with the tzitzis? Don't the tzitzis just fall away? I start to become so floating around in life that almost things become insignificant on the frayed parts of life. I almost don't pay attention to them anymore. That's what Korach was arguing. He was saying, if I turn my garment, which represents my unified self, into techeiles, into a space of total focus on God, total focus on oneness and consciousness, don't the tzitzit start to fall away? Now, interestingly, you have many individuals that make this mistake. You know where you've had this mistake made? The Kabbalah movement. Okay, you have this movement called the Kabbalah movement, where Madonna got involved, some other Britney Spears, I think. Well, that's what we're going to learn now. Britney Spears got involved as well. I think she tattooed God's name into her arm. Yeah. Yud K Vav K. So the Kabbalah movement very much makes the same argument. They make the argument, they say like this. They say what everything is about is consciousness. What everything is about is just being in a space of tranquility and recognizing the universal oneness that exists. That's what life is all about. Which at the end of the day, that's true. It is all about that. But they come to the tallis, they come to the mistake of saying, but the tzitzit falls away. When you can focus on your entire garment being techeiles, you don't need tzitzit anymore. You don't need to do the mitzvot. You don't need to engage with Shabbos. There's a big Kabbalist, I won't say his name, because I have a few of his books, but not from choice, but teaches unbelievable stuff. But if you go to him on Shabbos with a copy of his book, he'll sign it for you. He'll autograph it on Shabbos. So he's nuts. We won't go into exactly who and where and why. He's a nutcase.
Not the Australian guy.
I see, again, we're not going through anything. We're not going through anything, but chill. It's not the Australian guy, all right? But nevertheless,
He's the Kabbalist.
that's also not true. So the idea here that we're understanding is a fundamental relationship and balance between inner consciousness and the frayed edges of self. The requirement to deal with the frayed parts of self. And what the mitzvot, which are symbolized by the tzitzis, because how many tzitzis are there? The tzitzis are there to remind us of the mitzvot. The purpose of the mitzvot are to highlight your frayed edges. Oh, there's a mitzvah to keep kosher. I don't really feel like it. Oh, really? Well, what's your relationship to food? How over inundated are you with that particular desire? I don't really feel like Shabbos. I don't feel like it. Well, what's your relationship to constantly doing? Having to engage with activity that you feel is a form of your... Okay, I understand. But what's your relationship to self on a deeper level? That's the frayed parts of self that the mitzvahs come to highlight and allow work to now start to engage and transpire within those spaces. Now, Korach couldn't understand that. Couldn't chap it.
That's a hard thing to chap.
Very hard thing to chap. Because it's the abrasive part of self. It's not an easy abrasion to deal with. Someone asked me the other day, they said to me, we both hold of this concept of unity. We both hold of this concept of consciousness. But why do I need to do the mitzvahs? Why do I need to go through the roots of Judaism if this concept exists elsewhere in other modalities? And my answer to him was, you're 100% right in terms of the direction. But in terms of the mechanisms that get you to that direction, understand that the abrasions and the separateness that's found within self, there are so many things that are hidden in the self that can be healed, that it will take 10,000 lifetimes in order for an individual to be able to achieve what they're able to achieve in one lifetime through the process of dealing with the mitzvot that really start to take out all of the muck that's inside of the self. And that's what we spoke about, and that's what the Zohar speaks about. The Zohar says this. So he says like this: Ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim amadu tisnosu ava be'emes gvoya ma gvoya shomer gvoyim aleim ad ein kates ve'ein soif ve'ein tachlis v'oiraisa v'yisrael kutsha brichu kula achad ve'ein kates ve'ein soif l'mayim mitzvahs haTorah kedusha k'mesh kosu the kol tichla ra'isi kates rachava mitzvah sechem oid k'moi sha'pachus sha'pchusim tzarich l'kayim mitzvahs haTorah lisatev b'tzitzis. So he says like this, very simple argument again. He says, for the general plebeian that doesn't have consciousness, that their entire garment is not filled with blue, it's not filled with the techeiles, it's not filled with the consciousness, that's a guy that needs tzitzis. That's an oak that needs to wear tzitzis, because they're struggling. Me, he says, Korach, I'm the spitz of the spitz. I've lived.
Korach, for the layman, who was Korach in our history?
Korach was an individual in history. When the Jewish people left the Mitzrayim, they were traveling in the desert. He was related to Moses and Aaron, and his arguments were presented to the Jewish people that he also wanted to be a leader. It wasn't fair that Aaron and Moses were the ones chosen to be the leader. He said we're all holy, and he wanted to be also within the echelons of leadership.
What became of him?
What became of him was he was swallowed by the ground alive. The ground swallowed him up, and I asked my son this last night, why do you think out of all of the things that he could have died with was to be swallowed up? And I will give you his pshat. I was blown away. Amazing insight from Chaim Ruvain Ojech. So he says to me, I'll tell you why Korach was swallowed by the earth. He said,
I'll tell you why.
He said, Moshe and Aaron was given credence to be the leaders by God. Hashem said, this is who I want to be a leader. This is who I want to take you through. And Korach questioned that space. Again, very similar to our initial engagement where we said that sometimes we have to grasp everything. We can't just relegate or let go. Relegate's not the best word. Nullify the self to the wisdom of God. We struggle with that. And Korach struggled with that. He struggled and he questioned. He says, why can't I also be a leader? Why does Hashem need to decide? It makes sense I should also be. I'm part of the family. So Ruvi said, who created the earth? Hashem created the earth. Who created the structure of the earth? Hashem created the structure of the earth. Now, we don't question that the earth is going to be stable for us. We walk on it. I mean, God forbid, in places like New Zealand, you question it every day because of the earthquakes there. But generally, you're not going to question the stability of the earth. You're not thinking that one day you're just going to be walking through the street and the earth's going to open and swallow you alive. So he says, because Korach questioned Hashem's premise that Moshe and Aaron should be the leader, so Hashem said, fine, we'll allow your questioning of that basic infrastructure of God's wisdom to open up the earth, which is also a basic infrastructure of God's wisdom. Unbelievable insight, beautiful concept, and that's why you're swallowed by the earth. Many, many other interpretations around this as well. Beautiful idea. So that's what happened to Korach.
Lots of nachas.
Yeah, beautiful nachas. I was blown away. So to conclude here, gentlemen, he writes like this. Says no matter how high you come into in terms of your consciousness, no matter how many meditations you do and how much inner sanctity and inner tranquility and inner resonance you're able to strike, you are never exempt from the mitzvos. You always need those tassels. You always need to engage with consciousness and recognition of your frazzled self. If you think about in business, you're running a business, you can never get to a level where you feel like, you know what? It's all hunky-dory here. It's all flowing here. You always need to question. You always need to think to yourself, well, what elements can I improve here? Maybe I have aspects here that I can develop. Maybe I can engage with this. Don't fall into your laurels and just feel like, you know what? That's it. And what the tzitzit and the mitzvos are doing constantly are reminders that you are an individual that needs to work on yourself. And yet there are parts of self that even though you're able to find a deep sense of serenity and consciousness and tranquility, that you might fall short to in terms of your consciousness and awareness that you need to grow in this area. And the mitzvahs are these constant reminders of those parts of self that you need to work on. When you're sitting in shul, someone said to me, and I have this in myself many times, okay, let's go. I'm struggling, I can't focus, or I want to go. I want to do something else. What inside you is making this so difficult? Ask myself. Sometimes I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling like I can't focus, or I'm feeling unstable or not centered within that space. And I ask myself, why aren't you present? Why can't you focus? And that allows me to now start to unpack parts of self that need to create a sense or breathe in a sense of consciousness. And that's why Korach questioned this. Rak shebevadei etzlei nasa tikun al yedei mitzvah kafi ma shetzarachu. Kemuvan b'tikunei zohar. Linyan tefillin, nershaim, inun, shure, l'kol mekatra gin dilahoin. Aval afal pikein, kulam tzrichen laniach tefillin, b'shalv.
Can I ask you another question?
Of course.
Not relating, it's relating to Gary's question, which Ruben answered. If we supposed to emulate God, Hashem, and Hashem punishes somebody for questioning him by swallowing him up with what he created, is that how we're supposed to act? Somebody's not acting the right way, we're just supposed to...
Great question. Do we...
guide them and...
Great question. So are these environments, and it's a very big question for punishment in general. Do we see God as a punishing God? Do we see God as a vengeful God? Do we see God as a consuming fire? Now, there are verses that clearly say that God is a vengeful, consuming fire. And I imagine you engaged in all of your relationships that way. Consuming fire, which is vengeful. I mean, that is not a very godly state, is it? Seems a bit strange. That's Manuel's question. I mean, imagine every individual that questioned you, they got swallowed up by the earth. You just organize for them, take out some things from their car, God forbid, and the car doesn't do. Like Putin. Yeah, any individual that questions him, done for. Done. Who are you to question me? I'll kill you. God forbid that should be the way. So it's a very, very poignant question. And we need to understand that when it comes to the energy of punishment in life, it's not a punishment. What it is a balancing system in the world that is being created. So if you think about the homeostasis of one's body, their own body, if a person isn't eating healthy, if they're working and stressing too much, if they're not engaging with centered activity that is healthy for who they are as an individual, the body starts to give an indication that something's wrong. They start to reach fatigue, they start to get sick, God forbid, they start to have all of these elements that indicate something is wrong. And there are those indications that sometimes aren't listened to, and it goes even further. And what we refer to this very simply as is a similar example to an individual traveling on the highway. If they start to fall asleep and those bumps on the side of the road wake them up, are those bumps on the side of the road a punishment? Not a punishment. They're there to give an indication to a person to recenter. And Hashem is not there to punish. Hashem is there as a system. It's an organic energy that allows a person to recalibrate who they are. Now, what happened with Korach was this is an outcome of his own behavior. Korach never died. Korach, it says, was able to recalibrate himself even when he was swallowed by the earth. It says that he was able... Again, what does it even mean that he was swallowed by the earth? So many explain what it means that he was swallowed by the earth is that the earth represents an energy of depression. And he was swallowed by depression. He was swallowed by feeling stuck. And through that, he was able to recalibrate. On a deeper level in a person's life, the Rebbe of Lubavitch said this: if a person is experiencing unhealthy anxiety, they're experiencing unhealthy depression, all of these elements, it's an indication that they're being swallowed by the earth. And that's a time for a person to question, where in myself can I recalibrate? So Hashem is not doing this to be like, oh, you're not listening to me and get stuffed, I'm going to show you who's boss. No. Hashem is saying, in your own life, if you can't relinquish your desire to grasp everything and know everything and have control of everything, you're going to be swallowed by the earth.
Swallowed by the earth, then you're overtaken by worldly matters.
Exactly. That's exactly what it means. And that's an indication then for a person. So Hashem is saying, I want you to be happy. If you can't let go, if you can't live in life in a space that transcends your cognition, then you're going to be so overwhelmed with life that you get swallowed by the earth. That's essentially what's happening. So to conclude here, I mean, the essay here, or it goes on for a little bit longer, but we'll conclude just for time's sake. What we are seeing here is this really powerful understanding. That Korach was coming along to Moshe and you're saying, listen, according to my intellect, all of this doesn't add up. I can be a leader. The tallis doesn't need to have techeiles on if it's all blue. The room doesn't need to have a mezuzah if it's all svarim. And the same too is saying in our own lives, we have to understand firstly the purpose. The purpose of life is to be connected to consciousness and to live in a state of oneness and resonance and unity. But at the same time, it can never question the plebeian aspects of self. A person can use consciousness to remove themselves from life. Pleb is like this low level of individuals that just the lowest levels of this world. They're not the general. So what we're seeing here is this interplay and this relationship that we have to have with life. That consciousness, and I'll give you a beautiful example of this. I remember I used to daven at Rav Tzvi Meyer, one of the great Kabbalists and teachers of today. And I remember, if you go there for a Shabbos morning, starts maybe at 8 a.m., you'll probably finish about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Okay, that's the extent of prayer services. And trust me, it's not because they're doing long mishabeirachs and having a kiddush club. They are davening on other levels. Okay, other levels. And I remember watching this. I was watching Rav Tzvi Meyer davening for like hours, like just floating. And one of his kids came up to him, and they tugged him on the tallis. They tugged him on the corner of the tallis. I'm thinking like, God, this oak's, he's so connected. He's not noticing anyone tugging him on the tallis. The kid tugged him. I've never seen such a warm face. He went out from his realms in the heavens, came back to earth. The warmth and the love that he showed his child, just to show him, listen, I'm with you. I can't talk to you right now. And he gave the child the sensitivity that he needed. And then he went back into his upper spaces in the heavens. It's an amazing, amazing experience that I saw. But that's what he's saying here. You can never get to a level where you are detached from your kids, or you detach from the world, you detach from basic sensitivities. And you can never get to a level where you become detached from the mitzvot. The mitzvot are constantly there to sensitize that external layers of self, that they don't allow for anything to become embedded and penetrate, that it starts to actually affect the core. These are constant reminders that allow a person to work on that frayed part of self. So please God, in that merit, as we mentioned this morning, we should destroy the energy of Korach, which is kina, jealousy, roimimus, arrogance, a need to be a person of stature and everyone has to bow down to you and worship you and think you're the bee's knees. And the last one is the energy of chemda, this desire space. I can't deal beyond myself. I have to eat, I have to have this, that's a very unhealthy energy. These energies exist. We are human. But the purpose of the Torah is to heal those spaces and elevate consciousness into the depths of the frazzled self. And that's what makes you holy.
What was the Vav that you were saying?
The Vav of Korach, which is not written, represents connection. A Vav is straight and it represents a space of connectivity. When you don't have the Vav, it's an indication that those three things are playing too much of a part in a person's life.